The imperial hatchery of Valdris Prime smelled like sulfur, scorched marble, and something dangerously close to burnt fur. 3 of the Emperor's most decorated dragon handlers had already quit this month. One had resigned by launching himself through a stained glass window. Another had simply stopped showing up, leaving only a singed boot behind as evidence he had ever existed. The baby dragons were, by every professional assessment, impossible. There were 7 of them, 7 heirs of Emperor Kaelvorn the Eternal, each no larger than a house cat, each radiating enough chaos to level a small village. They bit. They breathed fire at random intervals. They shrieked at frequencies that shattered ceramic. They refused to eat unless their food was presented in a specific order that changed daily with no apparent logic. 2 of them had already set their own bedding on fire out of what could only be described as boredom. The Empire's finest pediatric specialists, Valdrisians, Zorith scholars, even a Grethian mind whisperer, had all failed. And so, in desperation, someone in the Imperial Court had filed a request through the Galactic Medical Exchange. Which is how Jack and Lily ended up standing at the entrance of the Imperial Hatchery, holding travel cases and wearing expressions of professional calm that were entirely at odds with the screaming, flame-burping chaos visible through the iron grate doors. Jack was a pediatric nurse, 34 years old, from a small hospital in rural Wisconsin. He had worked neonatal ICU for 6 years, then general pediatrics, then a brief, harrowing stint in an emergency ward during a particularly bad flu season. He was the kind of man who could change a screaming infant's 4-line one-handed, while simultaneously answering a mother's anxious questions and sidestepping a vomiting toddler. Lily was a child behavioral specialist, 31, originally from Lagos, now working out of a research hospital in Edinburgh. She had spent years studying emotional regulation in high-distress pediatric cases, children with severe anxiety, sensory disorders, neurological conditions that made standard care approaches useless. She had a gift for reading what a patient needed when they couldn't communicate it themselves. Neither of them had ever treated a dragon before. But as Lily had said on the transport ship when Jack raised this concern, they're babies. Babies are babies. The Imperial handler, a tall Valdrisian named Sorvith, met them at the door with the expression of a man who had already written their eulogy in his head. The hatchlings are in a destabilized bonding phase, he said stiffly. They require a primary caregiver imprint, but every candidate has triggered their defensive instincts. They respond to perceived threat with fire, sonic shrieking, and, he paused, coordinated emotional manipulation designed to cause psychological distress in observers. Jack nodded. So they're having tantrums. Sorvith stared. They are the Emperor's heirs. They do not have tantrums. Sure, Jack said pleasantly. He was already pulling on heat-resistant gloves. Can we go in? The first 10 minutes were exactly as bad as expected. The moment they entered, 2 of the hatchlings, the ones Sorvith had labeled Dominant Alpha and Secondary Challenger, launched a coordinated fire burst at the doorway. A third one, curled in the corner, began the sonic shriek. The remaining 4 watched with bright, calculating eyes from their respective scorched corners. Jack didn't flinch. He had once stood calmly in a NICU while a 3-day-old somehow projectile vomited across the entire room and then set off every monitor simultaneously. He had a very high baseline for chaos. He crouched down to floor level, making himself small. He didn't look directly at the fire breathers. He just waited. Lily, meanwhile, had taken out a notebook and was writing in it, completely unbothered. She didn't look at the hatchlings either. The shrieking stopped first. Dragons, it turned out, shrieked to provoke a reaction. When there was no reaction, the behavior became pointless. The shrieker, a tiny iridescent green one, tilted its head, confused. That one's an attention seeker, Lily said to Jack, still not looking up. Classic. Probably the middle status hatchling. Learned that noise gets a response. The 2 fire breathers are threat testers, Jack agreed. They want to know if we're going to run. We're not going to run, Lily confirmed. They weren't. Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. Jack moved slowly. Always at the hatchling's level, never looming over them. When one crept close to sniff at his boot and then reflexively nipped at his ankle, he didn't yell. He said, "Ow," in a calm, matter-of-fact tone and moved his foot. The hatchling blinked. It had expected a retreat. It had expected shouting. It didn't know what to do with that. Lily had identified something critical in her notebook. The hatchlings weren't synced. Their feeding schedules, sleep cycles, and stimulation needs were all misaligned, which meant at any given moment, at least two of them were overstimulated or overtired, which was what was driving most of the aggression. They weren't vicious. They were exhausted and overwhelmed. "This is a scheduling problem," she announced to Sorvith, who was watching through the observation window with a look of disbelief. "You've been treating them as a unit. They need individualized rhythm management. They are hatchlings of the Emperor. They are treated as a group, I understand. But biologically, they're individuals at different developmental stages. The green one is at least 2 developmental weeks behind the others. She's been reacting to the group's stress cues and amplifying them." Lily tapped her notebook. "She needs separation during high stimulation periods." Sorvith opened his mouth, closed it. Inside the room, the little green hatchling had climbed onto Jack's knee. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor. He hadn't made a big deal of it. He'd just been there, consistently, quietly, until curiosity had overridden suspicion. Now the green one was on his knee, and 2 others were circling warily, and Jack was humming something low and tuneless, the way he always hummed during night shift rounds because it kept him calm, and, as it turned out, it kept newborns calm too. One of the fire breathers sat down. By the end of the 3rd day, Jack had named all 7 of them. This was not authorized. Sorvith had nearly had a cardiac event when he found out. The Emperor's heirs had Imperial designations. They were not named Noodle and Captain Flamesworth and the one who stole my pen. "The names help with individualized response," Jack said, utterly serene. "I need to distinguish between them quickly. It's a medical practice. You named one of them Noodle. She's very noodly. Long neck, very flexible, sleeps in a loop. It's accurate." Sorvith went to lie down. By the end of the 1st week, Lily had restructured the entire hatchling care schedule. Individualized sleep rotations. Separate feeding times with food presented according to each hatchling's emerging preference pattern, which Lily had tracked meticulously and which turned out to follow completely logical internal rules, just not rules anyone had bothered to observe carefully before. Captain Flamesworth, it turned out, would only eat if his food arrived after he'd had 15 minutes of independent movement time. He was asserting autonomy. Classic toddler behavior. You just had to give him the 15 minutes. The one who stole my pen, Sorvith refused to use that name and called him Hatchling 4. Needed social reassurance before eating. He needed to see another hatchling eat first. He was anxious. Anxious kids needed predictability and gentle repetition. And once Lily built that into his routine, the behavior settled within 48 hours. At the end of the 2nd week, Emperor Kaelvorn himself came to observe. He was 7 feet tall, ancient beyond human reckoning, with scales like hammered gold and eyes like dying stars. He had ruled the Valdris Imperium for 600 years. He had never, in all that time, seen all 7 of his hatchlings sleeping simultaneously. They were piled in a loose heap on a warmed platform, including Noodle, who was indeed coiled in a loop, and Captain Flamesworth, who had eaten a full meal and was sleeping off his victory. Jack was sitting nearby doing paperwork. Lily was updating her behavioral notes. The Emperor was very quiet for a long time. "How?" he finally said. Jack looked up. "They're kids," he said. "You just have to figure out what they need." Kaelvorn looked at the sleeping heap of his heirs, 7 future rulers of an interstellar empire, currently snoring in a pile like a basket of exhausted puppies, and said nothing for a long moment. "The human staff will receive imperial housing, full compensation, and whatever resources they require," he said at last to Sorvith. "Permanently." Sorvith nodded. He had seen enough this week to know that was probably the correct call. Jack accepted this news with a polite nod, then went back to his paperwork. Lily was already designing the expanded care protocol. Neither of them thought it was particularly remarkable. It was just what you did when you worked with kids. Babies, after all, were babies, even when they breathed fire. Humanity, it turned out, was uniquely suited for caregiving across species, not because humans were the strongest, or the fastest, or the most powerful, but because humans had spent 10,000 years figuring out how to love something small and chaotic and helpless into something extraordinary. The universe, slowly, was beginning to notice.